outside my window.
Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth with your host, the Green Bard. This is Danny's Dragon Bonds, Volume 5, Part 3, Starry Wisdom. In the daytime? This episode continues our discussion of Daenerys and Drogon's bond in A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys 10, her final published POV chapter, beginning with the Starry Vision with Quaithe. Like many in the fandom, I initially thought a lot of the telepathic suggestion in this chapter was communication from Quaithe directly, using glass candle or whatever method available to her as a scion of the Church of Starry Wisdom. However, in questioning that assumption, it occurs to me that we only have strong direct evidence of Quaithe's machinations early in the chapter. She also mentions the dragons knowing. Could some of Dany's interactions in this chapter be evidence of not a third-party influence, but of Drogon? Drogon is a part of herself, after all. Certainly a dragon dream is suggested by the mention of flying in this passage, and we know that Drogon is in all her dragon dreams from our study of A Game of Thrones. She dreamed. All her cares fell away from her, and all her pains as well. She seemed to float upward into the sky. She was flying once again, spinning, laughing, dancing, as the stars wheeled around her and whispered secrets in her ear. To go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. To touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Quaithe, Dany called. Where are you, Quaithe? Then she saw. Her mask is made of starlight. Remember who you are, Daenerys, the stars whispered in a woman's voice. The dragons know. Do you? With the stars whispering in a woman's voice, it seems this passage is indeed Quaithe. But remember, this is a dragon dream, and Dany is flying in it, meaning Drogon would be at least present for it, if not heard directly. Recall how we've learned that thoughts and feelings flow both ways through the bond, to the host and to the writer, so imagine that Drogon's mind is a part of this. Heck, let's imagine Drogon has been a part of every other interaction that Dany has had with Quaithe, even going back to A Clash of Kings, at least in a passive, observatory manner. Drogon has been in her mind since the beginning of her dragon dreams, starting with her second chapter in A Game of Thrones. If you haven't yet, I urge you to watch my first 4 Dragon Bond videos, which cover A Game of Thrones and discuss the magical implications of Dany's dragon dreams. You can then follow up with the rest of the series and all her dragon interactions as it builds up to this point. The Cliff Notes version is that Drogon has been in her mind to one degree or another from the moment of her first or second dragon dream. It is Drogon and his influence that gave Daenerys the confidence to do the impossible and hatch the dragons. Could it be that Drogon is now still there, trying to get her to break out of the shell of protection that she's built around herself in Meereen? First, though, let's deflate the idea that the visions in this chapter are all Quaithe's influence. Later in the chapter, especially for Dany's visions and conversations during the daytime, I question whether this communication, which requires a satellite such as a glass candle or other means like the whisperings of stars, is infeasible. My understanding of these communication methods is that they use the satellite to bounce telepathic messages across continents. So, in the daytime, the sunlight would overpower communication by starlight or moonlight, just as daylight makes the stars invisible by night and the moon nearly invisible. That is probably part of the secret knowledge of the Church of Starry Wisdom, of which Quaithe is a follower, along with Archmaester Marwyn and Mirri Maz Duur. I do leave open the possibility of Quaithe being able to use weak communication in the early daylight or dusk hours, just as we can still see Venus at dawn or dusk, when the other stars are invisible. I just think we should question the baseline assumption that it is all Quaithe. To me, George R. R. Martin is writing more subtly than Ford planned it all. However, I see an alternative. A fair bit of this later communication during the chapter may be Drogon, though not all. It's evident that the dragon, while feigning complete ignorance of her, seems to be watching over her closely the entire chapter. As we said last time, protecting her from the known-to-be-near Dothraki horde. Drogon may also be using the bond to watch her even more closely and even exert its influence. Certainly, he is the only character who is near enough to her for direct telepathic communication, other than those Dothraki, none of which has a bond to her. Her conversations are in the voices of Quaithe her brother Viserys, Jorah Mormont, and the grass. Well, Viserys is dead, Jorah is in Meereen, and Quaithe, well, we have no idea where she is, but I assume that she is not in the Dothraki Sea. We've already covered the passage that likely is Quaithe, but the rest of the visions and dreams are less conclusive as to their origin. After Dany being sick the next day from some malady, presumably eating bad berries, but also perhaps from a miscarriage, the next dream, in Viserys' voice, may be just from Dany's own mind. We don't have much indication that Quaithe or Drogon have any influence on it. It is mostly about Dany questioning her role in his downfall and death, part of an existential crisis for Dany.
"Once," he said, so bitterly it made her shudder, "you were supposed to be my wife, to bear me children, with silver hair and purple eyes, to keep the blood of the dragon pure. I took care of you. I taught you who you were. I fed you. I sold our mother's crown to keep you fed. You hurt me. You frightened me. Only when you woke the dragon, I loved you."
This inclusion of the Wake the Dragon theme from A Game of Thrones is partially why I don't think this is the voice of Quaithe. It would make no sense for Quaithe to continue that theme in an insulting and debasing manner.
"Do you want to wake the dragon, you stupid little whore? Drogo's Khalasar was mine. I bought them from him, 100,000 screamers. I paid for them with your maidenhead. You never understood. Dothraki do not buy and sell. They give gifts and receive them. If you had waited—" "I did wait. For my crown. For my throne. For you. All those years, and all I ever got was a pot of molten gold. Why did they give the dragon eggs to you? They should have been mine. If I'd had a dragon, I would have taught the world the meaning of our words." Viserys began to laugh until his jaw fell away from his face, smoking, and blood and molten gold ran from his mouth.
Clearly, Viserys' exclamation is a warning to Dany not to wholly embrace fire and blood, something I discussed last episode. However, I have an answer to Viserys' question. Why did they give her the dragon eggs? Simple. It takes a magical Valyrian female to hatch eggs, like Rhaenyra and Dreamfire Rhaena before her, like Daenerys. Viserys would have failed to do so just like Egg did before him at Summerhall. The exceptional Targaryen female with the double Dragon X chromosome, as Preston has named it, is what was needed to hatch dragons into the world. The princess who was promised. Dany is sick again when she wakes up from that fever dream, and this is where I believe Drogon takes a more active role in the dialogue. I think Drogon has an opinion on what Dany would do next, and he is trying to use Daenerys' fevered state to convince her to follow that path. Note, I'll continue to use he, him, his pronouns for the Black Dragon, as does George R. R. Martin, even though I suspect Drogon capable of eventually laying eggs.
"If she had not been so sick and scared, that might have come as a relief. Instead, she began to shiver violently. She rubbed her fingers through the dirt and grabbed a handful of grass to wipe between her legs. The dragon does not weep. She was bleeding, but it was only woman's blood. The moon is still a crescent, though. How can that be?" She tried to remember the last time she had bled. The last full moon? The one before that? No, it cannot have been so long as that. "I am the blood of the dragon," she told the grass aloud. Once the grass whispered back, "Until you trained your dragons in the dark."
This is definitely the type of thought a dragon would share. Drogon, I think, 1. is the grass, 2. certainly knew its siblings were chained, and 3. did not like it one bit, as evidenced by the initial quitting of Meereen when Rhaegal and Viserion were chained. He does not want her to go back, not toward Meereen, but also not back to shutting out and shutting away her dragons. As discussed in prior videos, this also may indicate consciousness of guilt. Let's be clear, I am not suggesting that Drogon feels guilt for killing the girl Hosea, only that he is aware that by human standards it was wrong, evidenced by the simple fact that it hasn't happened more, at least that we know about. It also may be that Drogon did not intend to kill the girl, that it was an accident, or perhaps he realized it would be a problem as soon as it happened. In this chapter, George R. R. Martin directly indicates when the voices are either Quaithe, Viserys, or Ser Jorah, the latter two of which I attribute to Dany's inner monologue and existential crisis. In this passage, with the grass whispering, a name is not provided for the voice. The reason? Again, I think the grass is Drogon.
"Drogon killed a little girl. Her name. Dany could not recall the child's name. That made her so sad. that she would have cried if all her tears had not been burned away. I will never have a little girl. I was mother of dragons. Aye, the grass said, but you turned against your children.
Drogon considers her turning back on them a betrayal, a breach of trust, and his aloofness, his ignoring her, seems to be some sort of atonement or attempt at repairing that trust, and making sure she values Drogon going forward. To bolster my argument that this is the voice of Drogon, consider George R. R. Martin even gives us a clue earlier in the chapter that the voice of the grass is important.
When the wind blew, the grass would sigh as stalks brushed against each other, whispering in a tongue that only gods could understand.
Only gods, eh? Yet the doctrine of exceptionalism treats Targaryens as immune to the rules of gods. At least some of them. Also, let's not forget my Kingsblood theory that the four principal houses of Westeros, Targaryen, Stark, Lannister, and Baratheon, plus others added later when George R. R. Martin wrote The World of Ice and Fire, can trace their lineages back to the gemstone emperors of the great empire of the Dawn and their progenitor, the god on earth. So, with Targaryens being the children of gods, George R. R. Martin is foreshadowing that Dany will indeed hear the grass when it speaks to her later. Speaking of Targaryen exceptionalism, we need to shift and discuss the elephant in the room. Dany is sick. Aren't Targaryens supposed to not get sick? Could Drogon also have a hand in this? Consider this from Daenerys' 6th POV chapter in A Dance with Dragon as Dany talks to Sir Barristan.
I am the blood of the dragon, Dany reminded him. Have you ever seen a dragon with the flux? Viserys had often claimed that Targaryens were untroubled by the pestilences that afflicted common men, and so far as she could tell, it was true. She could remember being cold and hungry and afraid, but never sick.
I have a theory about this resistance to disease. Fire cleanses. It's fire magic that purges the disease from the blood of Targaryens. The bond to a dragon is one way to enhance that magic. I am convinced of this chiefly by Dany's own experiences in A Game of Thrones. See my videos on Dany's dragon bonds in A Game of Thrones, and later books like the prior quote, plus by 2 pieces of lore from Fire and Blood. The first, Daenerys, daughter to King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne, died of the Shivers, a plague that killed many in King's Landing. Other Targaryens were of course killed by later plagues, but as I recall, that was after dragons were gone. But in this instance, the toddler came ill from the Shivers, yet her parents were unaffected. In the last,
Jaehaerys bolted to his feet, shouting that a dragon was what was needed, that his daughter must have a dragon,
and sent for one from Dragonstone. I think that the king and queen were protected by their dragon bonds, while the child had no dragon. Jaehaerys' instinct was correct, but too late because she succumbed before a dragon was present. In another anecdote, consider Arya Targaryen and Balerion, who picked up fireworm parasites on their presumed journey to Old Valyria. Somehow the girl clung to Balerion the entire journey home, but quickly burned from the inside out within a day after she
slid from his back.
I think that she could never have made such a journey without borrowed strength from Balerion. Remember, the bond is enhanced by touch, so she quickly declined once no longer in physical contact with the Black Dread. Imagine now that the healing magic that I hypothesized Drogon has lended Dany as early as her 3rd POV chapter in A Game of Thrones is being withheld now by Drogon since she left him prior to getting sick. Or perhaps Drogon has needed to self-heal since their escape from Meereen, so he was diverting the energy to his own use. Either scenario would leave Dany prone to sickness in a way she'd never been throughout the story. What follows the voice of the grass is another encounter, this time in the voice of Jorah Mormont. This is possibly Quaithe, but may also have some of Drogon's voice. We'll investigate this scene next time. Before I leave you though, we'll consider one last magical interaction, written just before the earlier interaction with Quaithe. It's a magical plea from the far north of Westeros. The howl of the silent wolf, Ghost, sent through the weirwood net and the boughs of the earth, through root, water, and stone. Ghost howls forlornly, and Dany and Drogon hear it. Hear the loneliness of a secret Targaryen, betrayed through his wolf's anguish, reflected to another lonely Targaryen.
Off in the distance, a wolf howled. The sound made her feel sad and lonely, but no less hungry. As the moon rose above the grasslands, Dany slipped at last into a restless sleep.
This signals to us that Dany is attuned to the voices of dragons, and indeed she hears not one but 2, Jon Snow and Drogon.
Thanks to all the terrific artists artists whose work is featured on this video.
Thanks especially to those in my family who helped in this series so far.
Outside my window is a tree. Outside my window is a tree.
If you enjoyed this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.